Hello, this is Peter for Sana Zero Cyrus, and welcome to my review for Metal Gear Revengeance. Apparently they couldn't find synonym for revenge or vengeance, so they decided just to make up their own word. Either that or combine the word revenge and vengeance into one word for effect. Wait, what? Revenge is a real word? The act of gaining revenge at a rate of at least 2.54 times greater than that of standard revenge and 1.61 that of standard vengeance. Those are rather specific numbers. Considered to be an act of the most violent retaliation under Free Dictionary, basically another word for revenge and vengeance. Yeah, you learn something new every day. You know what totally sounds like a Metal Gear game? Obviously a game that focused on fast-paced and stylish combat, where you fight bombastic and over-the-top bosses, doing stylish combos along with slicing your enemies to pieces, and looking cool while doing it! Okay. A fast-paced action game is not what you usually expect from a Metal Gear game. Well, except for the over-the-top bosses. Metal Gear strangely have those in spades. But just because something is different in a series doesn't mean that it's going to be bad or even all that out of place if it still retains the spirit of the series. So the question is, does Metal Gear Revengeance retain the spirit of the Metal Gear series as well as being a good action game? Well, let's find out by starting this review. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is an action game with a few stealth elements mixed in, with the game being first developed by Konami Productions, but was later passed on to Platnum Games, probably due to their expertise in developing fast-paced action games, with games such as Bayonetta and Vanquish under the belt, and lastly the game being published by Konami Productions. Visually, I say the game looks very decent to good. The character models looks pretty good for the most part, and the character design via the futuristic cyborg / robotic look that this game got going looks pretty slick and awesome. With not only Raiden looking pretty wicked, but also the bosses look great and the enemy have a pretty good look to them as well. The environments looks okay, but nothing special about them. I even say they look a bit drab. The animation is great in both in-game and cutscene wise, and if you're wondering how the frame rate is, since this is an action game, I say the frame rate is pretty great with me experiencing no slowdowns in the game when I was playing through it. The visual is probably not what you're expecting of a Metal Gear game. Well, a Metal Gear game on a 7th generation console, but I still think it looks decent enough compared to other games. Sound design wise, I say the music is pretty awesome. It really pumps you up when you're in a fight. Though most of the standout tracks are probably the boss battle themes, with the other tracks that play during other parts of the game being good, but not as great as the boss themes, especially with how the themes in a boss battle changes its tempo the further you progress in the boss fight. Voice acting wise, I say it's fairly good, with Quentin Flynn reprising his role as Raiden, and he sounds as good as he was in the previous MGS games, with the new cast members being voiced pretty well as well. I say my favorite of the new cast is probably Crispin Freeman's Sundowner.
What about all the good things war has done for us? Why don't we ever hear speeches about that? We're saying, give war a chance!
So far so good. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance seems to have some pretty good visuals, and the sound design is pretty great so far, so let's get to the story! Story-wise, the game takes place after MGS4, where Raiden, who is our main character in the game that became a cyborg because of the events between MGS2 and MGS4, is basically working out of a private military company, or private security provider as he likes to put it, where he is tasked with defending the Prime Minister of, well, I have to be honest, I'm not sure what nation this guy is the prime minister of. I don't even think the game really specified. They just say it's in Africa. Anyway, let's just say that the job goes bad, to say the least. Due to the intervention of another PMC company, Desperado Enforcement. Anyway, after the event, Raiden is outfitted with a new cyborg body and is now determined to find and basically put a stop to the PMC company that basically butchers his job in Africa, Desperado Enforcement. Well, okay, he's not directly going at them at first, but he eventually gets there. The story as well is really silly. This is perhaps one of the most silly Metal Gear stories I have seen. And no, that's saying something in this series. The Metal Gear games have gone against telekinetics, a rollerblading bomber, a guy who attacks with freaking bees, and note that this boss appears in MGS3 where it's set during the Cold War era, so even that boss doesn't have the use of nanomachines.
Nanomachines, son!
An apparent immortal vampire, an old sniper that explodes when he dies, and the list goes on. And this is apparently set in an alternative version of the real world. So, yes, Metal Gear does really have its really silly moments. So, how does Metal Gear Revengeance top this? Well, basically like this.
Wide open! Good, Raiden, yeah!
Yes, there's cyborgs, but even I have to find this really silly if I have to be honest. So yes, the story is over the top. Yes, it's silly. Yes, it can be a bit awkward at times, but you know what? It is glorious because of the elements I just mentioned. And I do think there is some neat stuff in the story itself. And the setting still feels like MGS, coming off of MGS4. So I'm saying that I'm willing to buy this story into the canon of the Metal Gear universe. Though do know that most of the setting, you probably have to consult the codec to get more information about it. Well, pretty much most character backstory motivation comes from the codec as well. And that's probably the main problem with the story. There are quite a few plot elements in the story that's only explained in the codec only, which can make the story a bit clunky. So yeah. Character-wise, I say that Raiden's character is interesting in this, and his development and how it evolved his past is rather interesting as well. The other characters are, well, if I were to describe them, they are fun characters. From Raiden's team, from the conversation they have in the codec, which are pretty lengthy but also really engaging, to the group of antagonists that Raiden encounters. They are really fun characters, especially with how over the top some of them are. Well, most of them. I still find Monsoon to be pretty boring. Overall, I say the presentation is good. The visuals are nice for what they are, with the character models looking fairly good and stylish, the music being awesome and the voice acting is fairly good, and the story being entertaining with how over the top and silly it is, with the game providing pretty fun characters to interact with to boot. The con of the presentation is probably how drab the environments could look at times, how the over the top and silly story of MGR might not be everyone's cup of tea, and how some plot elements of the story is only available in the codec. Now we get to perhaps the reason why Hideo Kojima handed the development of the game over to Platnum Games in the first place, namely the fast-paced gameplay. Gameplay-wise, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance plays out like a fast-paced action game with some stealth elements mixed into the fold, where you go from point A to point B, hacking, slashing through enemies, as well as occasionally fighting mini-bosses, as well as real bosses, as well as occasionally using stealth. The first thing I'll talk about is the combat system and how stealth is integrated to the game, and then other stuff such as the replay value, how long the game it takes, and etc. Combat wise, you'll be controlling Raiden, where you're able to do a strong and standard attack, as well as doing a variety of combos with the main weapon that he uses, aka the HF blade. Also at his disposal is the blade mode function, which allows him to manually enter a mode where time slows down, where he's able to manually slice off his opponent's limbs, or basically cut his opponent to pieces. But do note that while you're able to freely slice and dice standard enemies from the get-go, higher level enemies will have to be weakened first to where their individual body parts and eventually their body will shine blue when you do enough damage to them, which is an indication that you're able to use blade mode on them. Well, use blade mode where it actually cut something. Blade mode along with Ripper mode, which is basically a mode where Raiden is in a powered up state, where his attacks are significantly strengthened, and you basically get the mode later. Both these functions uses the fuse cell bar, which is the bar below the health bar. You can regain fuse cells by either attacking the enemy or using the Zandatsu function, which is a function that allows for Raiden to absorb an enemy fuse cell if he slices their torso just right, while in blade mode, which will not only fully restore his fuse cells, but also his health. Raiden is also able to do some execution moves if the enemy is currently stunned, which will allow him to basically throw around an enemy and enter blade mode where he's able to basically hack them to pieces. Along with his offensive options, Raiden also has Ninja Run, blocking, and parrying in terms of his defensive capabilities in terms of combat. Ninja Run is basically a mode where Raiden basically, run faster and is able to avoid obstacles via jumping or sliding beneath them, along with being able to deflect oncoming enemy bullets. Though you're probably going to be holding the RT button to activate Ninja Run most of the time, since his running speed without it is pretty slow. Well, slow in comparison to the action that's happening. So it's very unlikely you're able to dodge enemy attack if you're going to run in the normal mode. And really, the moments where you're not using Ninja Run is really only in the stealth aspects. Now for the last defensive option that Raiden has, which is blocking and parrying. Blocking is pretty self-explanatory, with Raiden being able to block oncoming enemy attacks by pressing the standard attack or X button in the direction of the enemy oncoming attack, while parrying allows him to do a counter attack along with blocking, but requires much more precise timing than a standard block. But do know that not all attacks can be blocked successfully, with there being attacks where if you do block, they usually damage you, or with an unblockable throw. Along with the HF blade that Raiden uses, he also has a variety of secondary weapons, sub-weapons, and restorative items which he can equip via MGS style. Secondary weapons are weapons that Raiden gains from beating particular bosses in the game, which allows him to change his sword strong attack to him using the secondary weapon, which does open up combo potential that the game can bring. Well, probably not much, since the polearm is really the only secondary weapon that has a fully realized moveset, with the Sai and Crossblades being more complementary weapons to the sword. Well, the Sai being the most complementary and Crossblades being the great sword of the game basically. So in the end, the Sai and Crossblade doesn't really have a moveset like the polearm does. But the Sai and Crossblades are really useful in their own right. Anyway, the sub-weapons are basically long-range weapons that Raiden can use, which ranges from rocket launchers to grenades to using utility items such as boxes and barrels for the stealth aspect of the game. But do note that using the rocket launcher or grenade is not recommended when you're in the midst of a fight, since, well, you do have to aim them, so yeah. And lastly, you are able to equip restored items, which will automatically heal you if you run out of health or out of electrolytes in your fuse cell bar, depending on what item you equip, though you are able to use them in the equip screen if you want to. Overall, I think the combat is tons of fun. It's fast, there's a decent to good amount of variety of movesets they can play around the game. Blade mode is simply great to use, from slicing and dicing the enemy to using the Sandatsu function. The secondary weapons are fun to use, enemy variety is good, the blocking pairing feels pretty rewarding, as well as does the execution moves. And the enemy doesn't really get stunned that often, so it doesn't really seem cheap they can use an execution move just after they get stunned. Well, at least for me, I played through the hard, very hard, or Revengeance difficulty, and the enemy getting stunned is a rare occasion. Well, except for some enemy types like blocking the Gecko bow charge, for example. And the best part of the combat is probably how fantastic the boss battles are. From how they have multiple stages, to the quick time events evolving boss battles being well done, to the boss themselves just being great boss battles in terms of game design outside of those elements. The boss battles are really the highlight of the game and are just intense and just fun to go through, and also very varied. Still, I do have one particular problem with the combat, which is the camera. It can be pretty problematic at times, with how the camera auto-corrects itself, and even locking on doesn't really help much outside boss battles. And the camera doesn't just apply to combat, it also applies to the stealth aspects of the game as well. So yeah, long story short, the camera is a problem in the game. Another problem, and it's a very slight problem, is probably how the game explains some of the mechanics. Like with how the game explains that you have to push the directional stick to the direction enemy attack with the X button in order to block them, which got me thinking that you have to tilt the control stick up if it's a horizontal attack, or right left it's a vertical attack, but you just really need to tilt it in the direction of the enemy. But as I said, the tutorials are just really a minor problem. Now for the stealth aspects, it's pretty simple. Basically just sneak up behind enemies and go stabby with them, while also using boxes and barrels to conceal your position. Well, adding that, you can also use various grenades, like the phosphorus grenade, to help you in your stealth, while also using the AR mode just to figure out where the enemy position is. So yeah, as I said, it's really simple. Heck, you don't even have to worry about enemy discovering bodies, since bodies disappear along with enemies practically being dead, with the prime example with me being able to stab a gecko behind another gecko. Overall, the stealth works, but I can't say it's done overly well. There is also an upgrading system which can use the BP that you get from missions, which is reflected in how well you do in battle via battle rankings, where you can get more moves, upgrade your health / fuel cells, buying costumes, as well as upgrading your equipment. Overall, I say it's a good upgrading system where it does make you feel stronger each time you spend your BP on something with the upgrading system. Lengthwise, it's a pretty short game. You can probably beat the game in like 6 to 7 hours if you play it on the standard difficulty, even shorter. I first played it on hard, so it might have taken me a bit longer, but it's still a short game, with me playing through hard, very hard, and Revengeance in about 20 to 25 hours. And speaking of difficulty, Metal Gear Rising does have a range of difficulties, from your standard, easy, normal, or hard at first, with additional difficulties unlocking, which are namely very hard in Revengeance. Having played very hard Revengeance, I probably go briefly into what these modes basically change from the easy and normal hard difficulties. Well, you basically get the AI being more aggressive, as well as them doing more damage to you, as well as enemy variety being different this time around. Such as for one stage, you might have basically only a group of normal grunts for this one area. Well, these normal grunts are changed to Masyaf, which is the gorilla type of enemies. So yeah, those type of changes. But I do have to mention the change from very hard to Revengeance, which is to namely say that the damage that the enemy can dish out is pretty insane, with one attack outright killing you if you don't have a nano piece equipped. But it is also the only mode where parrying do an absurd amount of damage. I mean, being able to 2 or 3 hit KO a boss. So Revengeance can be a lot of fun after very hard, just because you might need a different mindset for Revengeance mode. Also note they can unlock the very hard Revengeance mode from the start if you're able to input the Konami code on the title screen. Overall, I say Metal Gear Rising Revengeance gameplay is great, with the fast-paced action being exerting the playthrough, with both blade mode and intense boss battles being a highlight, as well as having a good upgrading system and great difficulty settings, with okay stealth. The biggest problem to Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is probably the camera. Overall, I think Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a well-made game that still retains the spirit of the Metal Gear series, more or less. The visuals are nice for what they are, though probably not up to par from what you expected from going Metal Gear Solid 4 to this if you're expecting a progression in the visuals. The characters are fun, with the codec interaction being a joy to listen to. The story is enjoyable just because of how over the top and silly it can be. The setting feels pretty consistent with the Metal Gear universe, having come from Metal Gear Solid 4, and the gameplay is tons of fun with the fast-paced action that the game provides, with blade mode probably being one of the most unique mechanics I've seen in a fast-paced action game, and the boss battles being absolutely fantastic to go through. The stealth elements are okay, though particularly not really well done. The cons to the game are probably the camera, how some parts of the plot can feel a bit clunky due to how some plot elements are really only available in the codec itself, and well, the over-the-top nature of the story can be a bit much for some people. But all things considered, I still had a blast with this game.